Hey Bob, how you? They're turning your blue light on.
I'd like to call the council meeting to order. Council is now in session. At this time, I'd like to ask Councilman Aaron Brown to have the invocation for us and to pledge allegiance to the flag.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Let's bow our heads. Dear God Almighty, I call upon you to give the governing body of the town of Somerville wisdom, understanding, and harmony to make decisions that benefit citizens of the town of Somerville. I also ask for your protection for our first responders that work and put their lives on the line to keep us safe. Thank you for your continued blessings upon the town of Somerville. In your holy name I pray, amen. Down for the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
At this time, we have a proclamation resolution we'd like to present now. Somerville High School girls softball team winning the state championship. So at this time, I'd like for them to come forward, please. And then Miss Beth will read the proclamation and I'll present it to y'all. So if y'all just come forward and stand right up here in front of the diocese for me.
Whereas on May 24th, 2023, the Somerville High School softball team captured the South Carolina High School League's 5A State Softball Championship. And whereas under the guidance of Coach Heather Tucker, the Somerville High School softball team earned the SCHSL state title, the first state championship by a softball team in Somerville High School history. And whereas the Green Wave completed their season with a 32-1 record with a total score differential of 298-7. And whereas through hard work, dedication, teamwork, and commitment, the Lady Green Wave brought honor upon themselves, Somerville High School, Dorchester District 2 schools, Dorchester County, and the town of Somerville. Now therefore be it proclaimed that the mayor and town council of Somerville express their sincere appreciation and respect for the Somerville High School softball team and Coach Tucker for the Lady Green Wave's outstanding achievement and their inspiration to youth across South Carolina through their dedication, teamwork, and athletic power.
Let's keep moving. Next thing on the agenda is approval of the previous, the minutes of the previous meetings.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to approve the minutes of the May 11th council meeting, the May 19th special call council meeting, and the June 5th standing committee meetings with the correction in the finance committee meeting. The correction is to change Sourcewell to Omnia in the financial requisition for Hugie playground equipment.
Second. Motion on the floor and a second. On Terry's motion, any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by raising your right hand, voting aye. Aye. Opposed likewise, the ayes carried. Okay, this time we're gonna have a public hearing on the municipal budget fiscal year 2024. Rhonda.
Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of council, members of the public. We are having our public hearing on our FY 24 budget. As you can see, here's the public hearing notice. Estimates that our revenues for 2024 will be $45 million, $425,199, which is a almost 9.5% increase, and our millage is remains at 66, and our expenses are the same. I want to explain a little bit about our budget. This is a little bit of history of our budgeted expenditures over the last 7 years. 2017, we were at just under 31 million. Last year, we were just under 41,488. These numbers are significantly support our employee resources. We have 435 employees. Some of these expenditures include liability insurance, equipment insurance. We have utilities, street lights, software, fuel costs, vehicle maintenance. There's certainly a variety of expenses that we are managing here at the town with this budget. Our budget goals for the year. First of all, we want to be good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. We also want to keep our wages competitive. We've struggled in that area in the last few years. We'd like to find a sound way to fund capital. We have capital needs every single year, and we'd like to find a way to do that. And we'd like to maintain our current millage, keep it from going any higher. Have two graphs that kind of depict the breakdown of the revenue. This particular graph shows our budget for this current fiscal year that we're in now, and overlays the actual of 22 and the proposed for FY 24. And it trends about the same. But what you can notice from this graph and from some subsequent information is that property taxes and licenses are our major source of revenue. It accounts for almost 2/3 of the town's revenue. This again is a little more detail, but it actually it shows our proposed budget with our actuals of FY 22, and they're very, very similar. They're small increases. You know, our property tax revenue is has modest increases from year to year. This is a table showing those same revenues. This is the budgeted revenues over 22, 23, and 24. So they've migrated some. We've seen a little bit of increase in licenses, a little bit of increase in governmental revenues, and of course, a little bit of increase in property taxes. This year, we are looking at fund balance to appropriate to fund some capital expenditures. And we typically have transfers in from other funds, hospitality. We are actually having a transfer in this year of $144,000 from the roads fund, which will fund a debt service portion of our Midtown TIF bond issuance from last year. This is a schedule. I wanted to include this, council, because this is the typical format that you've been looking at. Wanted to show you, the green lines are the items that were added since last time we discussed this. We discussed funding, capital and using fund balance, 2,059,192. The green box in the bottom right-hand corner, itemizes what those items are. The second green line that says TIF bond debt service, that is the shortage over the premium that we were issued when we issued bonds last October, that will be due next, April. So that part we'll have to fund out of the general fund, which we are funding with the roads fund. This is our capital schedule. Again, the third box down is the general fund, capital listing. We're able to use the remainder of ARPA funds to fund some capital expenditures. Local accommodations, we are funding some items for that, and hospitality tax as well as impact fees. And of course, stormwater, we'll have one item that will fund from stormwater fund balance. This is the complete budget in ordinance format, and it shows 2023 and 2024. And it does include, the fund balance, and it includes the appropriation for the debt service. So our total, total budget this year will be 45,569,636 as presented, in this ordinance. Any questions, comments?
Mr. Morgan, we're projecting roughly 16.9 million property tax revenue, is that right? And 67.6 mills, does that mean we projected a mill for like about 254,000? Is that the number we've used before, or is the value of the mill down?
I think that's about what we're using before. I usually get the assessed values from the counties, and they do change. The composition of that changes. I think we're at year to date, we're at 16.7, I think now. So should be right on that. I mean, obviously improvements happen. I don't know what some of those improvements might be as far as the additions to the tax roll.
But right now, we're projecting that each mill raises about 254,000. And the for the license, business license, the insurance business, and what else?
I think that's all that's in that category.
And if I looked at it correctly, in fiscal year 22, we actually brought in about $1 million more than we're projecting for this year.
I think
On the graph, it looked like we're projecting 12.5 million in licenses, but it looked like in fiscal year 22, we brought in 13.6 million. And then I noted in your presentation to us on Monday that it looks like we've already brought in about 12.4 million this year. Is that right?
we're not quite there yet. We still have probably about 3 or 4 million left. There'll be in the insurances.
Right. But as far as regular business licenses, we've already brought in about 97% of this year's projections
Right.
with a month to go.
One of the complications with this year and last year was the change in the MASC cycle. So this year I have like about a 1.7 million that came in last July. And so trying to determine if that 1.7 is normal revenue for this year, or would it typically have been pushed back to the previous fiscal year? So just trying to figure out the cycle so I don't overestimate.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I got one question for
Yes,
you.
sir.
What is that false?
So I'm sorry, I should have had a better description of that. That is local option sales tax. And that is what the tax dollars that we get from Berkeley and Charleston County, because they have the local option sales tax. Dorchester County does not. And part of that, we roll back to those two counties, 71%, I think it is. We roll back to the tax bill for those. So those citizens get benefit of that.
Thank you. I thought that what it possibly was, but I thought the public needed to know.
But yeah, it's not lost. Any other questions?
Thank you, Rhonda.
Thank you.
Does the public have any questions they'd like to ask Ms. Rhonda? Okay, that ends our public hearing. And now we're going to public comments. Now, these comments that we open the floor for now for items that are on our agenda. So I'll open the floor now for those comments.
Otis Engelmann.
Good evening. I'm Otis Engelmann, the Chair of Sculpture in the South. I'll speak to the accommodation tax distributions to organizations in the town of Somerville. First, just a bit of history, if I may. I won't run out of time, don't worry. Sculpture in the South is an organization started in Somerville 23 years ago by citizens. It has, to this point, resulted in the sculpture collection that is owned by the town of Somerville. That's in amounts over $500,000 to this point. We present that as part of our gifting, and that's the effort and the work of Sculpture in the South. The accommodation tax distributions has changed over time. Once upon a time, Sculpture in the South was eligible to receive these monies. Apparently now we're not, because we don't have events. The structure that, as I understand it, the Citizens Advisory Council is using for tourism to bring in, does your event attract folks not in Somerville to Somerville or their event? I'm going to contend to you that Sculpture in the South's event is every day, all day, anytime, no tickets, no admission, no fees, no time limits. It is there for consumption anytime. So if after an event, one of the other recipients might have, what do folks do with their children who are screaming? They may take them for ice cream. They may take them on a tour and let them find the birds in Somerville. People do that. The Citizens Committee, and I'm very supportive of Citizens Advisory Committees, and I appreciate your work in that area. But they currently find our posture not supportable for distribution of funds. And what I would ask is that council consider its directives to this Citizens Advisory Committee to change that limitation on continuous events. I have a second proposal. Other substantial municipalities in the area have departments to promote arts and culture. You don't have to look far to see towns that really succeed in this area. The Parks and Recreation Department we have is an excellent example of town monies spent in public interest. And I would suggest that Somerville has got to the point where it could sustain its own art and culture department. Certainly, you have the money. Thank you very much for your time. If I may, I'd just like to leave these two brochures with you. These we send hundreds to the visitors centers all over the state of South Carolina. They continually ask us to replenish them.
Thank you, sir.
Tricia Melton,
Good evening. My name is Tricia Melton and I live on Gahagan Road. When my husband and I moved to Somerville, our daughter was 9 years old. We rented a cottage from the Shelbournes right down the street here on West Richardson. Our daughter enjoyed riding her bike to Town Square, visiting Barchet's, and eating ice cream cones at Garrett's. My husband and I could shop for books, bread, nails, and stamps between Main Street and Seahurst. All of this is simply to say that while I may not be a been here, I am a come here 43 years ago. And I dearly love Somerville. I try very hard to be an informed citizen and stay abreast of political, commercial, and infrastructure developments in my town. I even frequently attend this chamber's meetings, mostly just to have my representatives inform me of what's going on, which you usually do. I rarely make public comments during this meeting. That being said, I have to say that I have concerns about the county's request to remove 500 North Main Street's 5.3 acre site from the Midtown TIF district. My concerns are mostly related to transparency and are as follows. Where was the public input during the focus group meetings that were held in June 2021, to which Town Council, the BAR, the Somerville Design Review Board, and other entities were invited? I understand we were still dealing with COVID-19, but as an interested and reasonably well-informed member of this community, I was unaware of these meetings. I have the same question in regard to public input for the March 2022 joint session of the Town Planning Committee and the BAR, at which Dorchester County issued and reviewed proposals to create a mixed-use destination in downtown Somerville, referring to the old hospital site. Where was the Somerville citizens' public input when Dorchester County received final offers for the tract in 2022? In March of this year, Dorchester County presented the town with the awarded developer proposal to receive comments and feedback. Again, where was the public input? The request for proposals for this project included a number of provisos that were listed as nice to have versus must have. One of these nice to have and thus avoidable on a number of grounds was to incorporate the old hospital portico and brick facade into the project. How did this proposed massive project get this far with so little public input? I don't know whether to call it a runaway train or a done deal, but I want to reiterate what Dickie Myler stated in a guest editorial printed in the April 12th, 2023 edition of the Somerville Journal-Scene. The town needs to, quote, take a deep breath, slow down, be totally transparent, seek broader input, and carefully weigh and realize all the long-term consequences of the decisions being made today, end quote. I would like to see my town council use every tool at your disposal, including deferring voting on this TIF request tonight, to slow this project down, provide my fellow Somerville citizens an additional and better advertised chance to give more input. Thank you.
Peter Gorman,
Good evening, Mayor, council members. Peter Gorman, I live on South Magnolia. I'd like to speak to item 10A on the agenda. This tax increment finance ordinance was adopted by this council last year with a total lack of transparency. It was dropped on us out of the blue with almost no notice or time for the public to consider the enormous impact it will have on the future of Somerville and its finances. No one spoke at the one public hearing you held on this extremely complex ordinance and bond covenant with just 24 hours notice. 4 years ago, council members running for office agreed that traffic was the #1 issue of the election. This was not adding to our $43 million town debt and new tax revenues. Voters voted for you on that promise. So here we are 4 years later, and you have dropped a traffic bomb on us that commits us to intensive development at the 3 busiest intersections in Somerville: Berlin G at 78, North Main at 78, and Maple at 78. These mixed-use developments call for adding 474 new multifamily units, as well as offices, retail, and residential units for the 145 million Sawmill development. It also calls for 220 new residential units on the old hospital block for $100 million. And more apartments and $100,000 square foot, $25 million sports facility complex in the Woodlands. Instead of tax increment financing, we should call it traffic increase financing. 4 years ago, voters also voiced their concerns that Somerville was losing its tree canopy. This TIF ordinance commits us to high density development on all the parcels in the TIF, including clear cutting of the 57 acres in Sawmill development on Berlin G, clear cutting the 4-acre hospital block, and possibly clear cutting the 35-acre Woodlands in order to pay off the bonds for the next 20 years. If you tally up the TIF revenues and expenses, it's a break-even proposition at $35 million. With rising interest rates and potential recession ahead of us, this whole TIF could stall, and the council would then be bound to raise funds from other sources to pay off the $1.5 million bond premiums until the economy recovers. Charleston would have held a series of public forums for a project this size long before making such a large financial commitment to a program that could dramatically change the appearance and the quality of life in Somerville. You owe it to your public to do the same. As you study this proposal further, be sure your bond counsel assures you that removing the hospital block from the TIF does not violate state and federal statutes. Thank you.
Hayward Hudson,
You can take some of
They
Peter's time.
tried that. County council did that. And it was not a pleasant scene.
I let you go over last time, Mr. Hudson.
I know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Mayor and members of council, I'm Hayward Hudson and I reside at 215 Golf Road in Somerville. I make these remarks on behalf of the Somerville Preservation Society. We request that these remarks be included verbatim in the record of this meeting. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to address the fate of 500 North Main Street. This is the 4th time that members of County Council have tried to destroy the old hospital County Services Building historic site. It is useful to review history. In January 1990, Town Councilman Sue Sanders, Rollins Edwards, Sonny Waring, Tom Fanugan, Steve Mueller, and Stanley Tucker signed a letter asking County Council to reconsider its position on the old hospital building, and the building was saved. In January 1992, the building was saved again by a new council that decided against demolition and in favor of the Cedar Street addition, replicating the Main Street side. In 2020, in the face of a 3rd attempt by Mr. Byers and other colleagues on County Council, the Somerville BAR recommended that the historic district be expanded to include the old hospital and 2 other properties. On 11 July 2020, with Mayor Bill Collins presiding, Mayor Pro Tem Terry Jenkins made the motion to give second and final reading to expand the historic district. That motion was seconded by Councilman Walter Bailey, and subsequently the motion passed with Councilman Terry Jenkins, Walter Bailey, Aaron Brown, Emma Garden Schmidt, and Bill McIntosh voting in favor. Only Councilman Bob Jackson opposed. It is disconcerting that we, the citizens of Somerville and Dorchester County, have little understanding of the wheeling and dealing that has gone on behind closed doors concerning the so-called county redevelopment plan and the town's tax increment financing district. The actions of county and town councils have a huge impact on our quality of life and our tax obligations. We have a right to know. We are voters and stakeholders. Initially, the county's objective appeared to be to gain tax revenue from the redevelopment of a site that has been in the public domain for at least 86 years and served the public well. The old hospital with a 1990s addition costing $14 million is unencumbered, no debt, with a relatively new roof and a beautifully renovated council chamber. Moreover, the county spent about $1.25 million on the building over the last 5 years. With rebuild costs skyrocketing, why would the county even consider demolishing a perfectly sound and obviously usable building? Every building requires regular maintenance, but isn't that a lot cheaper than the cost of a replacement? Why not restore the building like Dorchester District 2 did with the old high school? At a recent county council meeting, the county deputy administrator tried to justify including the old hospital county services building historic site in the TIF as a blighted area. He admitted to deferring maintenance on the building. Ironically, that intentional negligence probably caused some of the structural damage that supports the county's contention of blight. The old hospital was built from Somerville brown bricks produced in the Salisbury brickyard kilns a block away, making the building historic in so many ways. A recent article in the Somerville Journal Scene indicated that moving TIF may change fate of building. I respectfully request that each of you councilmen explain your positions clearly to us. Most of you voted in 2012 to protect and preserve the old historic county services building historic site. Was your vote sincere? Why will you reaffirm your 2012 vote tonight? Our position is clear. We are opposed to the sale of the old hospital county services building historic site. It belongs in the public domain. We are opposed to any actions that may lead to the demolition of the old hospital building with the 1990s edition. We are opposed to the displacement of the Veterans Memorial from its current prominent position. We support improvements to the park area and improvements to the building to preserve and maintain it for safe use. Thank you.
I do have Fran Harbison. Are you speaking about the TIF? Okay, yes, ma'am.
I think the previous speakers, the three previous speakers pretty much said what I would like to say to you. 500 Main Street is sacred ground, and it has many reasons for being sacred. It is historically significant. You said so. When I talk to people about the changes that may be coming, they say, nah, it won't happen because that's in the historic district. So if you've changed your mind about that, what else have you changed your mind about? Please don't destroy this. This is something beautiful and special to Somerville. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, that's all I have for people who signed up for agenda items for public comment.
Yes, sir, Mr. Quist. Did you sign up, sir? You don't have Mr. Quist down, Beth?
I do, but he didn't write what he was speaking about.
Ma'am?
I do, but he didn't write what he wanted to speak about.
Go ahead, sir. I'll let you talk. Go ahead.
Good evening, Mayor Waring and council members. My name is Adrian Quist and have lived in Somerville 58 years. My topic is protect and preserve. My remarks tonight will apply to both city and county councils. I came to Somerville in 1965, and during that time, for a number of years, many unique buildings were being demolished. There was no historic district and no preservation society. Fortunately, both of these organizations were established by the late Beth McIntosh and many others in 1972. After her death in 1986, retired Army Colonel Hayward Hudson has continued to protect and preserve treasured buildings of the past that we all have cherished and benefited from. It appears now that we have come to a crossroad that will drastically change Somerville with lots of proposed developments. I don't mind telling you that I have very strong feelings about this town, and I'm sick and infuriated by the proposed plans for 500 Main Street at Highway 78. My question is, why do we have a National Historic District and Preservation Society if we are going to ignore and break the rules of these organizations? Once these rules are broken, it potentially could have a domino effect on the rest of Somerville in years to come. I'm going to repeat some of the remarks I have made before. It is my personal opinion because the issue we are facing is betrayal of Somerville's past. The proposed business complex at 500 Main Street can be compared to prescribed medication for an illness that is not curable but can extend life with serious side effects. Side effects meaning destroying the gateway to Somerville with horrific traffic gridlock that we are already experiencing. Think about the history of the former hospital that served Somerville for many years. Think about the Veterans Monument that reminds us that men and women sacrificed their lives to protect this country. With increased traffic, think about public safety that will definitely be impacting our first responders that put their lives on the line for all of us. Somerville is already surrounded by hotels, apartment complexes, storage facilities with more on the way. And here we are trying to solve traffic issues. Are you kidding me? The proposed development, including the one on South Cedar Street, will also add traffic and parking problems rather than solve them. County Council stated it will compromise by saving the facade of the hospital building and move the Veteran Memorial to another location. First and foremost, memorials are not made to be moved. And I can't imagine how the hospital facade will look in the middle of 3, 4, and 5-story buildings that will be granted on 5.3 acres. I can't speak for everyone, but the majority of people I talk to are opposed to the proposed complex at 400 Main Street. We should not try to compete with Charleston, the hotel city, North Charleston, or Mount Pleasant, but rather set the example to protect and preserve Somerville's charm and history that we all cherish. My suggestion is to invest money to upgrade the former hospital building and maintain it like never before. Leave the Veterans Memorial where it is, improve the landscape, and save all the trees. You, as council members, were elected to do what is best for this town, and we as citizens are letting you know that it should not be all about money. Somerville is not for sale. A better idea would be to have a public safety and beautification campaign, but that's only my personal opinion. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Are you on the list, sir?
Are you-
I'm gonna have to stop you if y'all didn't say what you wanted to speak about, because,
It's North Main Street, 500 North Main.
okay, we've heard enough. If you didn't put on that North Main Street, I'm gonna have to ask you to sit down. Because we gotta move on with our council meeting. So let's move on to petitions.
Probably have an issue. This man gave it to people on behalf of what we're talking about.
Mr. Quist, I'll let you speak. And because I know you, but everybody was asked to sign up out front and what they wanted to talk about, the topic. And right, but I can go through the whole crowd and everybody can stand up there and state they wanted to speak. But we got to go by our rules. And, what does council want to do?
Well, Mr. Mayor, if I understand correctly,
Okay, we got two more people. I'll let you speak.
my,
Go ahead.
my understanding is the gentleman signed up, so he has a right to speak at the end of the meeting. But, so we're gonna be here just as long. It's just whether we let him speak at the end of the meeting or the beginning of the meeting, and he's saying that he wants to speak on.
Well, at the
500.
end of the meeting, he has a right to talk about stuff that's not on the agenda.
I understand, but he's telling us that he is talking about, I guess.
Go,
the tip-
go ahead, sir. There's two more people, so you go ahead and I'll let the next person talk too. Go ahead, sir. Yes, sir.
Tommy Fagan, 111 Ponderosa Road, Somerville, South Carolina. I wanted to speak on 500 North Main Street because North Main Street, that, like they said, it's a historic area. It's the bookend to Hutchinson Square. It's proper. Somerville proper. When you hit 78 on Main Street, you're in Somerville. It's always been that way since I went to Knightsville Elementary School. Piggly Wiggly store used to be right there that you used to drive to. You know, graduated from Somerville High School. My kids graduated from Somerville High School. Won awards in Gus Moody's marching band, state championship. And thought I was big enough to work on, to work out on Mr. McKissick's football team when I was a senior, but he proved me wrong. And the town of Somerville, we don't have a shrimp fleet that goes into the harbor. We don't have beaches. We don't have a battery. Goes back to the Revolutionary War and the Civil War. We have pine trees and azalea bushes. And people love to come to Somerville during our Azalea Festival and the Sweet Tea Festival because it's a small town. Now we can make the whole place look just like Highway 17A from the interstate to Carnes Crossroads. You can find that anywhere. You can find that in Upper Long Island. Once you leave the city, you can find it in New Jersey. You can find it in Connecticut. You can find it in Philadelphia. Just rows and rows of cookie cutter stores, you know, that's known all over, Targets and everything else. We have something special here, very special that people want to come and be a part of.
That's why everybody wants to come here. But get into the nuts and bolts of it, looking at the site plan that the county had for that 5 acres, they're wanting to put a 5-story, 220 unit multifamily unit right there where the facade of the hospital is. Put a hotel out on Main Street. I think it's 3 or 5 stories. And there's 2 30,000 square foot office buildings gonna go on 78. And they're only putting 454 parking spaces in the parking garage. Now, 220 units, and only leave but a couple left over for all the people in the office building. 2 cars per household. So, and when 78 phase 3B comes through, it's gonna take out those 2 office buildings. And the little park, that about 100 by 100 there on the corner, 78 comes through there, not to mention if anything happens to Main Street to widen it or anything, that's gonna take most of that little park away. So, you know, they were stressing how much money was gonna be made on tax revenue. Well, if you take out those office buildings there, it's gonna go away, and the retail spaces there beside the office buildings, when 78 3B comes through, that's gonna knock a chunk out of it. You know, you can listen to the used car salesman tell you all about what you might get, but look at what we are gonna get, because Somerville's growing. 78's gonna go through. Don't know what's gonna happen with Main Street yet. State might advocate that we have to make it wider. That's gonna take another swap out, and the motel's gone. All that's gonna leave is a 5-story building right on 78 and Main Street with 220 units of subsidized housing. So, please think about what you're doing. What you're doing is gonna affect us from now on. I've been places, I've worked in Manhattan. The quality of life up there, quite frankly, sucks. I've taken the train into Grand Central Station, rode the subway down into the financial district, and then you have to walk or take a bus. Quicker to walk, because you had to fight your way on a bus. The quality of life sucks. Let's not do that to Somerville. Let's keep Somerville the quaint, beautiful place that it always has been. Thank you.
The last one I have, I'm unable to read the name, but the address is 806 South Main Street.
Mayor, Town Council, I'm Stuart Courtney. My wife and I live at 806 South Main Street, and we oppose of the sale and demolition at 500 Main Street. You know, we don't need Somerville to turn into Charleston, much less Mount Pleasant. We've already got issues with traffic and schools busting at the seams. We don't need a high rise in downtown Somerville. We're destroying the character that helps make Somerville what it is and what draws people to our town. We hope you take heart to these comments and other comments that have been made tonight. Thank you.
And we'll move on to petitions. We don't have any petitions. Pending bills and resolutions.
Second and final reading of an ordinance to adopt an operating budget for the town of Somerville, South Carolina for the fiscal period beginning July 1st, 2023 and ending June 30th, 2024.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make the motion. We give second and final reading.
I'll second that. Okay, motion on the floor to give second reading and a second. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, based on the presentation from our finance director and my questions and her answers, I have a motion to amend the budget. My amendment would be to lower the millage from 66 mills to 65 mills, and therefore lower the projection for property tax revenues by $256,000, and to increase the projection for business licenses by the same $256,000.
I'll go ahead and second his motion.
I may be heard, Mr. Mayor. I've been fighting a losing battle trying to get council's attention on property taxes. And I know very well that a cut of 1 mil is going to have a nominal effect on our citizens' pocketbooks. But I think it's an important statement to make that we do care about them. I'm very proud of this budget and the 8% in most cases increase in compensation for our employees. But we did something a year ago that was completely unnecessary, and that was to raise property tax millage rates by 10%. We had our increase in property tax revenues in this year is going to be increased by more than twice the projected amount, meaning had we not raised taxes, our property tax revenues would have been what we projected them to be with the tax increase. It was completely unnecessary. This is an opportunity to make a statement, a very small statement to our taxpayers that we do care about them, that we're going to cut the millage rate a little bit, and we're not going to have to cut spending for it because we clearly under projected business license revenues by at least $1 million. Thank you.
Mayor, may I speak? Sure, we're in discussion.
Yes, one, the last 2 years, we have had an extra $7 million for free to use what we needed. We did do the tax increase, and we really wanted to give our employees 10% because they still aren't making anywhere near what the surrounding municipalities are. And they're getting bonuses to get them to stay right now till they can get their wages up. We were unable to do that. 2 years ago, we bought no capital at all to save the budget. No police cars, no fire trucks, nothing. This year, we're actually not paying for the 20 police cars because we're going into our savings to pay for those police cars. So how many $1 million is that? Right at $10 million we had extra in the last 10 years. Last 2 years. And Bill keeps telling us we have this gross oversupply of money. And if he told us where it was, it would lessen that impact. But we are not paying. We need a police department. We need a court. We need a fire headquarters. We have no money for those. We can't even buy police cars and fire trucks. And we want to cut taxes. Most of our taxes are paid by the people in Berkeley County. And yes, I don't like the way it looks, but your taxes would be a lot higher without those stores out there. I think it's right at about 80%. So do you want quality of life? Or do you just want to let the police and fire and all just flounder? Because we spent $2 million that we do not have. And you want us to keep going forward with that. Where do we get the next 2 million? Thank
We
you.
got my discussion on that is this, Mr. McIntosh, you made a motion 3 times that we decrease taxes. The last time you couldn't get a second on it. I know you want to raise business license fees. These people right out here, this group right here is saying that they love this town. The people that are operating businesses on the square are operating on a shoestring.
Mr. Mayor, I'm not talking about raising business taxes.
Business license.
That's not what my motion
What did you
says.
say?
I'm saying that we under project business license revenues.
I thought you said that we cut taxes and raise business license.
No, that's not what I said.
Well, so all you want to do is decrease taxes.
To keep the budget balanced,
Right.
We would take $256,000, which is what our finance director says a mill raises. We would cut taxes by 1 mil. So the projected property tax revenues would go down $256,000. In order for the budget to be balanced, we would raise our projection of business license revenues by the same 256,000. And what will happen is both will exceed that projected amount by somewhere around $500,000 to $1 million each. We will run a surplus like we almost always do. That's where the savings comes from that Mr. Jackson says we raised. We have $23 million in reserve balance because we run surpluses every year. We can easily afford this tax cut.
No, we can't. We cannot. I mean, I hadn't had anybody complain to me. None of this group that's sitting here has complained to me about us raising taxes year before last. And we raised taxes then because you talked to council before us into cutting taxes, the same thing you're trying to talk us into doing. Now, I know you're running for office, and a good thing to do when you run for office is to try to talk us into cutting taxes. We can't afford to cut taxes, Bill, because all the next council's going to do is raise them again. We are not rich, and we are operating on a shoestring. Like I said, these businesses are. We know that we said that we were going to have to tap into our fund balance this budget year coming to probably make things work, to do the things that we need to provide the service that these citizens sitting out here need. Fire protection, police protection, public works stuff that Mr. Cornett says we need, stormwater, traffic, these citizens say that we got problems with. I mean, that's not going to happen when we cut taxes. I mean, I don't care what you say about how your mathematician works in your mind. I know I sit and talk with Miss Rhonda and Lisa, who I trust to the utmost. I mean, the numbers just don't work because during the year, before we even start the year, our chief of police tells me that we need an IT guy in the police department. Well, it's not in the budget. He didn't put it in the budget, but he needs it. Our IT guy here that runs this building with hardly no help, he says he needs it. Well, guess what? We don't have the money. So Miss Wallace is trying to make that work. She's trying to make it work where she can find the money to give him his IT guy. Well, that's a year's salary that we don't have. That I'm not going to explain how she's trying to find it because we don't have time for that. But we don't need to cut taxes because that's not going to be the only department between now and the end of next year, budget year, that some department's going to need some personnel. And a council, not me, because I'm going to be gone, but a council with a new mayor, maybe you, is going to be trying to justify finding that money. And when you cut taxes, all you could be doing is looking at raising them again next year, you know, the next budget year. And I just don't think it's time to do that. Not when we just raised them year before last and we turn around in a year, in 2 years and cut them. That just doesn't make good sense to me. I mean, I've been fooling with this town since 1969. Mr. Berlin Myers in his 40 years of being mayor never cut taxes. He didn't believe in raising them.
That was going to be my question. How many times did he raise them?
Well, I know of a couple of times.
In 40 years.
But you know what? It's a different time. I mean, somebody mentioned that it got up at the podium, getting ready to go into a recession. I mean, I pray to God we don't, but everything leads us to believe we are. I mean, things will get expensive. I mean, and we talk about cutting taxes. I mean, I know that I'd like to see taxes get cut, but I'll be doggone if I can vote for it. I can't because I know what's going to happen. You can turn around and raise them again.
This is the last thing I'm going to say on it. Since I've been on council, we have cut taxes 4 times. Twice under Mayor Collins and twice under Mayor Johnson. Each time we cut property tax millage rates, that next year, the amount of property tax revenues went up, not down. That's just economics. It's the fortune of having a thriving local economy.
Why did we raise them then? Because the town staff is growing.
It is growing.
It is growing, and you got to have, I can't say what I want to say, because we got troubles here in City Hall, because we got a lack of staff,
And we are losing our
you know, and
high-end staff.
Mr. Mayor,
Very quickly.
If I might, I'm gonna try to, get us out of the weeds on some of this, and at least talk about some, what I consider the bigger numbers that I think we all need to be aware of. And I've spoken to Ms. Moore about this at length, but these are my words, not her words, because I don't want to, if I happen to say something that may be slightly incorrect, I don't want it to be a reflection on her. When we are at our flushes, and we're about at that time of year, we've got about $30 million in our fund balance. When we move down and start spending down where we're not generating any revenues, which is about next month, we start spending down that $30 million. We pull from that every month to run the town. And when we hit our low point, we are somewhere around 9.5 or $10 million. That's the money that we have in the fund balance with everything that's coming into the budget and the projections that we have. Now, in that $9 or $10 million, there's a $5 million emergency fund that is in that. That leaves $4 to $5 million left in a fund balance that's not in an emergency fund for another Hugo or the like. So what we're looking at this year, we're using $1 million worth of ARPA funds is in our budget, okay? We're using it in our budget. We have virtually no capital expenditures, none, zero. One fire truck, somewhere between $1 million, $1.5 million. So we're trying to incorporate in future budgets having capital fund expenditures in each department where capital funds are needed. We don't have the ability to do that now with the way the budget is. So contrary to what you may hear from others, we are not flush with cash. We've got $9 or $10 million left at the low point in the budget, $5 million in an emergency fund, and $4 to $5 million that we need to be able to have there to pull for capital expenditures that we currently don't have in the budget. I'd be happy to try to explain that in simplistic detail if someone wants to talk about it.
Mr. Jenkins, I just want to let you know, I agree with everything you just said. I think that's completely accurate. But the one thing that you didn't say is that at some point at the end of the fiscal year, you take a snapshot. It may go down to 9 or 10 million. It may go up to 30. But at the end of the fiscal year, we get auditors to come in and take a snapshot of what's in the fund balance. When you and I took office together in June of 2011, that fund balance, that snapshot on the previous audited year was somewhere around $11 million. Today, that audited snapshot somewhere around $22 million. We have doubled the fund balance since you and I took office in 2011, and we've done it by raising surpluses, almost by running surpluses almost every year. Thank you.
I just count with different numbers than Mr. McIntyre.
I mean, no matter how you count in my household, if I'm taking from my savings to pay for things that aren't even maintenance, they're just operating, just to keep the house going. It can fall down, but I'm taking from my savings. That is not a balanced budget. That makes me worry. When I'm spending $2 million, we had 7 million and we're taking 2 million out of our savings. That's $9 million that we won't have again. And where the surplus is, I don't know. We were lucky there was COVID, or we'd be in a real mess. We don't have a police station. We don't have a fire station. They're all packed in the same building, doubled up, and 6 people to a room. That is not budgeted. And you know, it is campaign time, and it's great to say, we'll reduce, we won't even charge taxes, and I'll build you a new highway, and it doesn't work that way. We need police cars, we need fire trucks, and we are not paying for them this year. We didn't even purchase them last year at all. So surplus, not what we spent $9 million, we don't have.
Mr. Mayor, if I could add a little bit to the discussion. So I think Councilman Jenkins did a fantastic job of outlining how important it is from a cash flow standpoint to make sure we know where we're going to be at our lowest, which happens to be at the tail end of our fiscal year, pretty close, somewhere in the middle to the tail end of our fiscal year. One of the things that we haven't talked about in this group is that we have infrastructure needs that have been recognized. One of those examples is the Lee Street Sidewalk Project that was, I guess, approved to get designed and permitted by previous council 12 years ago. And we may have some funding in this budget because of coming out of fund balance to actually bring that sidewalk to fruition. There are a lot of projects around the town that need to be accomplished. We hear a lot, or I hear a lot about infrastructure improvements. I hear a lot about bike and pedestrian safety and those quality of life issues. Well, all of that needs to be planned and then executed. I think Councilman Jenkins made the point that we don't have a capital fund. We need to have a capital fund. We need to have a comprehensive plan that is fiscally constrained year over year so that we have a pathway to deliver these projects instead of designing, planning, and shelving projects. Comprehensive plans on our infrastructure, comprehensive plans on bicycle and pedestrian connectivity. Those are shelved plans because we have no funding mechanism. So when I look back through the millage rate over the since 1999, our millage rate has gone from 80 mills, which it was consistently at in the late 90s, early 2000s, to I think 56.1. It's changed approximately 10 times from 1999 to today. And when I joined council last year, I found out that we do not have the ability to pay for capital. We were deferring maintenance on our facilities. We had the police and fire headquarters with officers and firefighters basically living in closet space. It was to me, it was disheartening because I had a different image of Somerville, the same character that you spoke about Somerville, some of you who spoke earlier. I believe that excellence was carried through every level of our town, but it hasn't been that way. So we need to plan and execute, and I think we need some consistency before we go making continued knee-jerk reactions that lead us to where we were 2 years ago. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gus. Okay, no, anybody else got anything?
Well,
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to speak a little bit to the history of the budgeting of the town. I've been on council a long time. Years ago, we used to have a great surplus. We were maybe 20% of our entire budget. But then we had a small population. We didn't have the population booming as it is now. We didn't have all these roads to take care of, all the sidewalks to build. We didn't have that many people playing in the parks. But now we can hardly keep up with the parks. Now, I know Councilman Bailey, Councilman McIntosh is talking about a one village. But I think at this particular point right now, we are facing a tremendous growth and it's very difficult to keep up. Because we have got entities that are coming into the town and they're opening businesses and they're bringing jobs. In a lot of cases, they're not paying their fair share. A lot of the cost of running the town is falling on the individual homeowners. And, thank God we got the American Rescue Plan money. Because if we didn't have that money come in, we'd be in a very, very bad position. We have not kept the police department up as they should. We've not kept the fire department up as we should. But things are changing. It's continuing to change. I think right now it's a bad time to even reduce the present budget just presented to us by 1%. Because I think we'll need that money going forward in the future. Money is getting hard to come by, but the population is still growing. We're spending a tremendous amount of money on parks and recreation. We're spending money on everything. And we're having to compete with the municipalities around us for good, qualified people to do the job of running the town. So it would be great to, have some additional monies, but we don't have it. And we can only tax you folks so much. So I think we need to try to get this budget passed as it is and look forward to the future.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Mr. Mayor, if I could, I second, Mr. McIntosh's, thing tonight on, because we wanted to discuss this, and I think we have had a good discussion of this. I agree with a lot of things that were said here, on both sides. At first I thought, lowering it by 1 mil, will it really make a difference? And I do look at our budget and I see so many needs and so many things that we still need that's not even in our budget for next year. And I'm not going to vote for this, but I'm glad that we had a good discussion.
Mr. Mayor, the last thing I'm going to say is this, and I mean, I knew the vote would probably go somewhat this way. It'll be 18 months from now, but we'll get an audit for this coming year. And there won't be a tax cut in it. There will, but 18 months from now. But let me back up for a second. When we debated the tax increase, I was relying on our very competent staff's projections. But when we were debating the tax increase, I sat here and said, when we get audited for the year we're currently in, there's going to be a $9 million, $10 million surplus. And I mean, I just saw the looks on some of your faces. You didn't believe me, but we did. 18 months from now, we'll get an audit back for this coming budget year. I would bet the farm, anything and everything, that when those audited revenues come in, we will collect property tax revenues in excess of $250,000 more than projected. And we will collect business licenses fees in excess of $500,000 more than what is projected. So what that means is, if we did vote for this, we would have a balanced budget, not cutting one dime of spending. What this might do is that it might mean we run a little bit less of a surplus, but that might not happen either. It just, we talk about our very dedicated employees. And I'm glad, like I said, I'm very glad that we're funding this 8% increase this year. But, it's not our savings account. It's tax dollars that have been paid to us by our citizens in excess of what we were expecting them to.
For myself, I wouldn't bet the farm because the farm is y'all's. It is your property, your town. It is our police and fire that protect it. And the overrun that Councilman McIntosh is talking about, no matter if it's double that, it's nowhere near enough to pay for what we need to move forward in this town.
Let's go ahead and call for the vote. We can vote for Bill's amendment. All in favor of this amendment signify by raising your right hand, voting aye. Okay, opposed likewise?
Nay.
Nay.
Okay.
Okay, now, if we have the motion and if we had the motion, okay, all in favor of the first motion and second, which was adopting the final reading on the budget, signify by raising right hand, voting aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise? Okay, the ayes carry it. Okay, B, Ms. Beth.
Second and final reading of an ordinance to amend Chapter 2 Administration, Article 2, Mayor and Council, Division 2, Mayor, Section 2-63, Authority to set meeting agenda.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make the motion to give second and final reading of the ordinance.
Okay, we got a second?
Second.
Okay, motion made and second. Any discussion? All right, all in favor of this signify by raising your right hand, vote aye. Opposed likewise, the ayes carry. C,
Second and final reading of an ordinance to amend Chapter 10 Elections, Section 10-4, Filing by Candidates, subsection A.
Mr. Mayor, make a motion to give second and final reading of this
Second that,
ordinance.
Mr. Mayor.
okay, motion made and second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor signify by raising your right hand, vote aye. Opposed likewise, ayes carry. D,
Second and final reading of an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 5, Section 5.11.2, Required Improvement for Final Plat Approval, subsection A, to clarify the process in relation to the permit to operate the water and sewer system.
Make a motion, we approve that.
Second.
second, okay, motion made and second. Any discussion? Okay, all in favor signify by raising your right hand, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise, ayes carry. Okay, E,
Second and final reading of an ordinance to amend the Unified Development Ordinance, Chapter 13, Section 13.6.1, Pre-application conference, subsection A, mandatory pre-application conference to include all subdivision review.
Mayor, I make a motion that we approve this.
Second.
okay, motion made and second. Any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I would just say that I did vote for this on first reading, which is normally my MO. If I can, I'll vote for something on first reading. As I understand it, I'm happy for Jesse to correct me, but as I understand the way the UDO is now worded, you only have to have the pre-application conference if the subdivision of lots creates a new street. And perhaps there are situations where you want the pre-application conference where a new street is not created. On the other hand, reading this literally, if you've got a lot in downtown Somerville where your house is, and you've got enough land to subdivide it, to cut a lot out for a child or whomever, and you're not a developer, you're just by right, you're entitled to this subdivision. Before you can even apply for the subdivision, you got to have a pre-application conference. I think this is just overkill. So I will vote against it on second reading.
The ordinance also allows the ability for staff to waive the TRC meeting if it's not needed, which we traditionally do in that exact type of circumstance. So they can apply for it. We have a TRC check in the actual subdivision application, the final plat application. So if it comes in, I check to see if it actually needs TRC. If it's something like you're describing, it would not. I say it doesn't, it's not required. And they move forward with their subdivision process without having to go to TRC.
But the code as now, if it's not creating a new street, there is no pre-application conference. You can't make them have.
Correct. And that is causing issues with stormwater.
I understand. I just think this is overreach.
Ms. Schuler, while you're there, if you could answer a question, do we have subdivision defined somewhere as a minimum amount of units?
No, it's not really defined as a minimum amount of units. I mean, a subdivision is when you subdivide a property, whether it be into 2 lots or 500 lots.
There are though, I'm hoping I'm right about this, there's 30 something UDO workshops all run together, but there are requirements and regulations under UDO, exempt provisions for subdivisions of less than a certain number, less than 5, less than 3. Am I correct about that? I mean, I know we've discussed it a lot.
there's certain things that are exempted. But it's not just exempt from review.
Right.
Jesse, and like what I did over there, where it's 3 lots or more, then it has to be a PUD.
No, this is just where it needs to go to the TRC so that we don't have the type of issues we had where we're now having to figure out how stormwater is going to work across the lots once they've already been subdivided.
Yeah, okay.
So it's to prevent issues when they're actually trying to develop it. When you're maybe having to work with 4 different people rather than being able to work with the first person.
That would be,
To subdivide.
that would be an issue like Councilman Brown had in his area where the buildings around it raised the elevation and pushed it all to people that were already living there.
Right. I mean, it primarily the TRC, a lot of it does have to do with making sure that stormwater and runoff are adequately addressed prior to subdivision.
But that's,
It's much more difficult to address. Also, sewer easements, that type of thing are addressed prior to subdivision because it makes it much more difficult to address once it's already been subdivided.
but the example that Councilman Jackson gives, there were streets created, so they had to go through this process.
There were, I'm sorry. I meant-
Well, the subdivision, which is, I think it's the Noisette, I'm not sure if I have the name right. With the stormwater problems, that went through TRC, that had a pre-application.
Well, it didn't because it happened before the UDO.
All right, it would today.
It's one reason why we put.
It would
TRC.
today without this amendment.
Correct,
Okay.
but we do have another one that's 12 lots on Corey that if we asked them to go to TRC and they agreed, but if they hadn't agreed, we really couldn't have made them and it would have been a major issue. So.
Thank you, Jesse.
We've got a motion.
Okay, we got a motion and a second on this. Any more discussion? Okay, all in favor, signify by raising your right hand, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise? Okay, Bill voting against it. Okay, introducing bills and resolutions. Hey,
First reading of an ordinance to amend the Town of Somerville Code of Ordinances, Chapter 20, Article 4, Section 20-102, to reduce the 80% discount of the maximum impact fee allowed to 0%, so as to apply 100% of the maximum allowable parks and recreation impact fee.
I'll make a motion. We approve that.
I'll second that, Mr. Mayor.
okay, got a motion and a second. Any discussion?
I guess I'd just like to explain a little bit what this is for the public. It's an impact fee. And I've always been for impact fees. Development needs to pay for itself. So this would be fees on new buildings only, not anything that's out there right now, which frees up capital from the general budget to pay for some of the park items without putting pressure on our present taxpayers.
Ms. Wallace, what about projects that are, I'm gonna speak, let's say, of the barn track. If you've got projects that are started, how does this impact them?
Well, I think it's going to depend on when you make this effective. So if it's effective upon second reading, then really it affects everything. And I have spoken to a few of you that I hope there is some consideration for the projects that we already have at some point in our approval process, so that this just isn't, sprung on them when they're already in the midst of their project. So I'm hoping that you all would consider putting some sort of a future date as far as when it's effective and on new projects.
So we can.
Is that something we can amend as we're speaking here to push this back to January 1st of 2024, or do we do that between now and bring back an amended
Yes, so
reading for second reading?
This is just first reading. So if that is something that council wants to agree to as far as setting a specific date, then we can have that included in the ordinance for second reading.
I would agree to that. I think we should do something.
I'm a firm believer in not changing the rules of the game once people already invested money. I think that sends the wrong message.
And maybe if it's already permitted, it's exempt. Anything permitted after that date.
Depends on how you define permitted.
Yeah, we've got a number of.
Lisa will tell me.
Okay.
Well, we figured the other day, what we figured, like $500,000 it would affect.
Right,
Built in.
in just one project that we've got sort of in process right now,
Yeah.
this would equate to an additional $500,000, so.
Which it could, you know, it could take somebody out of financing with that kind of money. You know, and they've already started. So, you know, so anyway, we can
But-
do that in second
I
reading.
do have a question for, I think for Ms. Wallace or somebody. I know we raised impact fees a year ago over my negative vote. And one of the things we talked about then was that, you know, we got rid of, I think we got rid of discount rates for some of the other impact fees. We have a municipal impact fee, a fire impact fee in parks, and we kept the 80% discount a year ago when we raised impact fees. Now we're coming back 1 year later, talking about getting rid of the 80% discount in total. Can someone, and maybe you, Ms. Wallace, can somebody remind us a year ago how much we added to the cost of a residential unit with those increases?
Yes, I believe I sent you all the discount rate worksheet. So if we just use single family residential home, for example, the prior fees were $1,135. The fees that were revised when we did the amendment a year ago, that bumped that up to $3,441.
We raised the cost of a house about 2,000 something. I'm a visual learner. I can't see it.
That's
So
about right.
what would getting rid of this 80% discount add this year to the cost of a new dwelling unit?
It would then bump the impact fee for a single family residential home to $6,523.
So it'd actually be a bigger increase than what we did a year ago.
Yes.
And we'll, in the span of 2 years, we will add to the cost. And I understand development paying for itself. I understand the concept well. But in over 2 years, we will add $5,000 to the cost of the new dwelling unit in the town. I just want to be real clear that that's what we're doing. And there may be folks who think that is a great idea because they want to see less houses built, or they want to see wealthier people come in and less middle class or poor people come in. There may be people that think this is great. I just want people to understand this is what we're doing. And from time to time, we have workshops and panels, and everybody wrings their hands about, we got to do something about affordable housing. Well, between raising property taxes and adding $5,000 to the cost of the dwelling unit, I'm fine with it. That's what we want to do. But can we stop talking about affordable housing? We're just kind of spitting out carbon dioxide when we do it.
Yes.
Ms. Wallace, I think,
Yes.
oh, excuse me.
I just wanted to mention briefly that the impact fee ordinance does have a provision to exempt affordable housing if it meets certain conditions.
Thank you for that.
How does it define affordable housing? I mean, when the average house in the town is over $300,000, I assume does not meet the definition. Okay.
Ms. Wallace, what I'd like us to do is if we can have first reading, but when we come back for second reading, I would like for staff to provide us with a future date that would accomplish that which we talked about tonight and basically exempt things that are in progress.
Okay. Right, there's a motion and a second on the floor.
Okay, motion on the floor, a second. We discussed it. All in favor of this, signify by raising your right hand. Vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Bill, opposed. Bill, I think the city of Charleston classifies that as low income housing, not affordable. I served on that committee. Now, what difference it makes in relation to what Jesse said, I don't know. There's a big difference.
That's gonna move it, well, we'll talk later.
Yeah.
You want to know what affordable housing, find is housing that is affordable to families whose income do not exceed 80% of median income with a service zone established for the town of Somerville. Do not ask me what that means, but that is.
Well, thanks for sharing the verb. Thank you.
First reading of an ordinance to,
Congratulations, boss.
sorry. First reading of an ordinance to rezone TMS number 13014130009, located at 715 West Fifth North Street, approximately 0.22 acres, and owned by Thomas A. Limehouse from NMX Neighborhood Mixed Use to UCMX Urban Corridor Mixed Use. This is in Council District 1.
Mayor, I make a motion. Mr. Mayor, I make a motion that we approve this.
Second.
Motion made second on C. Any discussion?
Mr. Mayor, I would just ask Ms. Schuler if she can explain to us the changes that will be allowed going from neighborhood mixed use to urban corridor mixed use. I realize this is only 1.3 acres and it's very close to a urban corridor mixed use zone. But as I understand it, one of the differences is in neighborhood mixed use, there's a height limit of, I think, 36 feet. An urban corridor would move to a height limit of 55 feet and higher if staff approves. So are there other changes between, what other changes? I'm sure there are between neighborhood mixed use and urban corridor mixed use.
Those are the main changes to the standards. It also, urban corridor mixed use also allows for a higher impervious surface allowance. There are also some differences in terms of the uses allowed. Urban corridor mixed use has some more intense uses that are allowed compared to the neighborhood mixed use. In particular, all of the automobile oriented uses are allowed in urban corridor mixed use, whereas most of those are not allowed in neighborhood mixed use. There's also some other uses such as like a bar, nightclub, that type of thing. However, where this location is, because the school, they wouldn't be able to have that anyway. So
So the main differences would be that more impervious surface can be more pervious surface.
more impervious surface would be allowed. So more surfaces that don't drain
Right.
would be
And higher,
allowed.
and
And a
another,
higher height limit.
another story or two.
Correct. And just a brief explanation of why you're correct. The next block is urban corridor mixed use. The reason when we adopted the UDO, we kept this as that we changed this to neighborhood mixed use because it was previously general business or B3. But the reason we changed it to neighborhood mixed use is because, as you can see from the exhibit, the orange properties behind this are single family detached residential properties. So these are immediately adjacent to single family detached residential properties. And along the 78 corridor, we tried to keep any properties that fronted 78 that were adjacent to single family properties as neighborhood mixed use. If you go to the next block, it kind of is its own block. There's nothing that's immediately
It's got
adjacent to it.
Wassaw Road
Mhm.
blocking it.
So that was why that we changed that to.
So
UCMX.
if I'm understanding you correctly, had we, in coming up with a new zoning map with, to go with UDO, had we given these properties the designation closest to what they already had, this would already be UCMX?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So the uses that are currently on there are legal, non-conforming uses.
Okay.
Okay, we got a motion to second on that, don't we?
Yes, sir.
Okay, any more discussion? All in favor of this, signify by raising your right hand, voting aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Ayes carried.
First reading of an ordinance to rezone TMS numbers 13014, 13007, and 008, located at 100 Northampton Street and 711 West Fifth North Street respectively, totaling approximately 1.1 acres and owned by Willie S. Limehouse from NMX Neighborhood Mixed Use to UCMX Urban Corridor Mixed Use, and this is in Council District 1.
Move for first reading.
Second.
Okay, motion made and seconded. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by raising your right hand, voting aye.
Aye.
Ayes carried.
Approval of a resolution to explore the request of Dorchester County to remove 500 North Main Street from the Midtown Tax Increment Financing District.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion. We give approval of that resolution to explore. I think from what we heard from what everybody said tonight, the only way we're going to ever get all the information out and understand what is going on is to do the exploration in front of us, and hopefully it'll be as public as it can possibly be.
We got a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, any discussion?
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, I'm not going to vote against the resolution to explore a request. I don't know if we need a vote to explore a request, but I just, I heard a lot today, and I've heard a lot in the community about this TIF, this tax increment financing district, and how it does and doesn't relate to 500 North Main Street. And I just, kind of want to just kind of set the record straight a little bit on this. That when this TIF was created, it had nothing to do with 500 North Main Street. The previous administrator put it in the map, but there was no discussion of 500 North Main Street. The reason that this TIF exists, and it's for one reason only, it's to generate revenues, what he called a barn tract along Berlin G. Myers and 78, and capture those revenues to finish the work at North Maple Street. If North Maple Street was funded, we would have never approved this TIF. Now, we're getting some information now that is extremely troubling about the debt servicing of these bonds. In my view, I supported the TIF up until I didn't. That was it. I don't remember who said that. Some presidential candidate. I voted for it. I voted for it. And then at the second and final reading, I voted against it because we started getting these projections. Interest rates were rising. We started getting these projections of debt servicing that were getting worse and worse for us. And when we approved this in September and October, I believe, of last year, the penny tax bond referendum was on the ballot. And North Maple was one of the projects that the county said that they would potentially pay for if the voters passed the penny tax. So that's why we have a TIF. We have a TIF for one reason only, is to finish North Maple Street. The county, whether it's about I think it is about 500 North Main Street. The county has kind of been dangling carrots in front of us that they've already agreed, since the penny tax referendum did pass, that they've already agreed to pay for half, and now they've agreed to pay for the first half. But I don't profess to know enough about bond law, but I'm very concerned that we offered bonds to the public based on a map, and now we're talking about changing the map and not knowing how it's going to change the performance of the bonds. That's my concern about our bond holders, the people that we offered these bonds to, and they bought them. my concern for our citizens is that if for some reason we don't use this TIF money to finish North Maple Street because the county has picked up the tab or whoever has picked up the tab. We all know sitting up here, the only reason we borrowed that $20 million was to do that. We wouldn't borrow that $20 million to build a regional sports complex or anything else. So, you know, I'm not going to vote against the resolution to explore requests, but this is serious stuff and it's complicated stuff. And I don't agree with Mr. Gorman very often. Is he still here? I don't agree with Mr. Gorman very often at all, but I think we need to pay very close attention to our bond counsel in this matter.
Any other discussion on the resolution for the TIF? If not, all in favor of exploring the resolution, signify by raise your right hand, vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Ayes carried.
Under miscellaneous, discussion and consideration of proposed change to Midtown TIF redevelopment area.
Mr. Mayor, I sent out a couple of scenarios for you all to consider if this resolution passed. One of the first steps in this entire process, which it is a very lengthy process, is to determine the redevelopment area. So what we have provided to you are two scenarios. Scenario number one would remove 500 North Main Street and add, which is of course the county services building, and it would add 300 West 2nd North Street, which is the Town of Somerville Public Safety Complex. Scenario number two would remove 500 North Main Street from the Midtown TIF. It would add 300 West 2nd North Street, and it would also add the Dominion property. And the reason those two properties were being considered or hopefully are being considered to be included in the Midtown TIF is because those two properties have been identified as potential future public safety facility sites. And by including one or both of those properties in the Midtown TIF, those TIF bond revenues could be used for either the redevelopment or the development of either one of those properties. However, if council is not looking at the Dominion property as a potential site for public safety usage, then I would recommend that we not include that in the Midtown TIF. That would be the only advantage in including it.
And Lisa, to Mr. Gorman's comment, it is my understanding you and Rhonda have had several meetings with our bond attorneys.
Yes, yes.
Okay.
And actually, we've got them slated to meet with you all next month if you need them to come down and meet with us.
And has it been positive or negative?
I mean, they have stated that, yes, we can do this, but there's not a legal reason that we cannot do this.
Since we have the map up, and I'm putting you on the spot, Lisa, so I apologize. Because this isn't your map. But does anybody know, for example, why Branch Creek and South Point subdivisions are on the TIF map? Just trying to figure that out. But if you don't know, we'll move on to the next thing.
I was going to say that was included when I got here, so.
It's baffling to me. I'm not aware of any new revenue being created or any development projects in that area. But, you know, the map is what the map is. I'd like, I would like to see if we end up not having to use TIF money for North Maple, if that's a possibility. I'm not sure that it is. We hear conflicting things from different county council members. But if it's a possibility that we don't have to use these TIF funds for North Maple after all, I mean, I think the only two options that make sense to me, and perhaps you can even do both. One would be to prepay some of the bond payments to cut the interest that we apparently will have to be servicing debt out of operating the next couple of years. And the other would be to put money into a new public safety headquarters or public safety complex. And I like the idea of it being in the same location. So in principle, and I've said this before, in principle, I don't have an objection to 500 North Main not being in the TIF. And in principle, I don't have an objection. In theory, I should say, really rather than principle, but in theory, I don't have an objection to adding the current public safety headquarters, because if we're not going to have to pay North Maple, and this council is not interested in paying down the principal so we don't have to service the debt out of operating, public safety comes first. I'm just not convinced that, I guess we'll learn a lot more next month. How's that?
I'm definitely in favor of putting the public safety complex in the TIF, but not the Dominion property. Because I think we can get the public safety, and I've talked to Chief Wright about it, talked to the fire chief about it. And I think there's enough room to put the court over there too. That we can keep everything on that property and sell the Dominion property. And I think we can do a better job of selling it and somebody developing it without being in the TIF district. And being under the gun, I haven't done by a certain time. But that's just Lisa and I talking and her explaining to me how TIF works. And I think it would be way less expensive, like some of our crowds been talking about, remodeling that police station and the fire station compared to starting from the ground up. That's an expensive thing to do.
I agree. And I like that. I like the current location. I guess I have one more question maybe for you, Ms. Wallace. Says, I've read in the paper, all I know, people say all I know is what I read in the paper, but the county, some folks associated with the county anyway, have said that, they want out of the TIF because it doesn't generate enough funds. And that they then want to try to have what's known as a fee in lieu of taxes for 500 North Main Street. Has anybody with the council, because county council, anybody with the county asked us as an entity to participate in a fee in lieu of taxes?
Not at this point, no.
I think, just to try to be transparent, I've heard people talk about transparency that they didn't, even though they had these, they call them charrettes or charades or whatever, these public things that nobody knew about. In full transparency, and the county's been, Serpent County council members have been very clear about this. The county owns 500 North Main Street. They can sell it. There's nothing in the world this town of Somerville can do to prevent them from selling it. It's just basic property rights. I think they can probably get about $5 million for it and generate about $100,000 a year in property taxes. Clearly, the county does not want to do that. What the county wants to do, I believe, what I read and understand, is the highest density development as possible and a fee in lieu of taxes, and then borrow money against it. And that's, that is their end game, clearly. So I guess we could keep them in the TIF if we don't want to be good neighbors or good colleagues or whatever, but we're not projecting any revenues. We didn't project any revenues out of this property. We weren't even thinking about 500 North Main when we created the TIF.
That's correct.
The end game is just that the county wants to generate as much projected revenues out of that 5 acres as absolutely possible so they can borrow as much money now as possible. And, you know, if we take it out of the TIF, we'll be assisting them in that regard, a step in the process. But to your knowledge, nobody's ever asked us to participate in a fee in lieu of taxes, which is, I think, really inappropriate for non-manufacturing development, but that's just my opinion.
Well, I guess I should clarify. Dorchester County has not. We have participated in Berkeley.
Oh, no,
County.
I mean,
okay.
just for this
Okay,
property.
yes,
I'm
okay,
only
all right.
talking about this property. I understand we participated in fee in lieu of taxes in Berkeley County for major manufacturers. That's what it's intended for. The oppressive tax rate of 10.5% on manufacturing, a fee in lieu of taxes is a way around that. But the statute's not intended for stuff like this.
Just to expand on what Councilman McIntosh said and what you said, Mr. Mayor. For anybody that may be confused about a TIF district, because I was at a public meeting where there were a lot of folks very confused about a TIF district. I'm not going to give you an education on that because I'm not smart enough, but taking 500 North Main out of the TIF district does not change its status as a historic property in the historic district, and all the same rules apply whether it's in or out of the TIF district. And so therefore, no change there for those who express concern, because I know that's very important. The look and feel in Somerville is.
And I agree with you completely. This changes nothing except that it will allow the county to do what they stated they intend to do, which is to pursue a fee in lieu of taxes, a fee load for that property, in which, you know, they want to be able to borrow as much money against those projected revenues as possible. So they need as dense development as possible. They can't do the fee load unless we let them out of the TIF. But simply taking them out of the TIF doesn't change a thing. But
Also too, we, just to let everybody know, and I'm talking to Will earlier when he came in, we have nothing to do with this council body has nothing to do with them demolishing that building, nothing whatsoever. We have, they can't come to us. We can't tell them they can do it. We can't tell them they can't do it. They do have to deal with our BAR. Personally, I don't think our BAR will give them permission to tear it down. Not if a crowd like y'all will go before the BAR and talk to them like you're talking to us. You just happen to be talking to the wrong people about demolishing the building because we don't have any jurisdiction there.
I tend to agree with you, Mr. Mayor, knowing our BAR. I do agree with you because knowing our BAR, watching how they've handled other projects, I find it unlikely too, but it sure does seem like I said something about betting the farm. It sure does seem like the county's betting the farm that they get their way with the BAR.
Yeah, I mean, they got full control of that building as far as what goes on to it, right down to them remodeling it. Everybody says, well, they can remodel it. They can if they go for the BAR. I mean, they can't touch that building by going for the BAR. They can't even change the windows in it. And so, you know, it's not up to us. And thank God.
Mr. Mayor,
You don't have to make that decision. And personally knowing the BAR and how they do things, I just don't think they'll let them tear it down. No.
Mr. Mayor, what guidance do we need to give staff between on these images? I tend to agree with Councilman McIntosh that TIF scenario number one, that map, if we are looking to take 500 North Main out, including the current public services area or public safety area and leaving out the Dominion property. As I remember, the Dominion property, when we had our strategic planning, was hopeful for economic development. And if we use that space for public safety, unless we absolutely need to, I think it's better used for economic development opportunities as we extend downtown across the tracks.
So that's what I think, you know, especially since we went over there and studied the police station. You know, Russ had got somebody to look at the police station. They told him we couldn't put a second story on it. Well, we went over there and found the plans. Well, I was hoping that I didn't dream that that building was on piling, but I was right next door. And I watched them drive them, and then I got to second guess myself. I said, well, maybe I was thinking about them driving piling for the fire station, because I know it's on piling. Well, when we found the plans, I got Gene Brislin to go over there with me. It does all my engineering work, structural engineer. Johnny found the plans and he spread them out on the table and he studied them. Not only is it on piling, but it's got steel piping in there all throughout the building that can't be taken out of that building. It probably could be, Gene said, but you wouldn't want to, especially if you could put a second story on it, because that would actually structurally help. But being on 62 piling, Gene said you could probably put 3 or 4 stories on that building. So somebody was thinking back in those days, that was in that building, it was actually the first, the floor that's there now was framed in when Hurricane Hugo hit, because we used it to store supplies in it. None of the interior walls were up, but no sheetrock was up, because we used it to store stuff in. But, so it's a well-built building, so it wouldn't be any trouble putting a second story on it, you know, so, once we found out that, then we went, you know, to thinking, well, when I talked to Chief Wright, you know, we felt like we had the property to do that, take part of the fire station if he needs that, and from then on, we felt like that would give us that Dominion property, maybe try to get our money back, you know.
So Ms. Wallace, are we looking for, I don't think it's a motion, but to give direction to staff to pursue the possibility of going after scenario number 1?
Yeah, and I do think if you could make a motion, this is not approving it. What it would do, if you would say, make a motion to use scenario number 1 to proceed with amendments to the Midtown TIF ordinance and redevelopment plan. That just gives us the direction we need so that we can create those documents in accordance with this map.
I'll make a motion to ditto that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll second. And this is for the exploration. As we do our research, it's going to be based on this.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Okay, y'all heard the motion from Lisa. Well, y'all heard her tell Terry what to say, and he just did over her.
You
In a
listen.
second. Any discussion on that? Hearing none, all in favor of this signify by raising your right hand, voting aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Ayes carried.
Consideration of state accommodation tax advisory committee's recommendations for funding.
Yes. I hear a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'll make a motion that we give approval to the State Accommodation Tax Committee's recommendations for funding.
Mr. Mayor, I would second, but I'm gonna need, but I'm gonna ask also to amend to take the vote on Flower Town Players separately, because I happen to serve on that board, but for about 3 more weeks. I'd like to vote on the others if I can't vote on the Flower Town Players.
And at the same time, I heard what Dr. Engelman said, and I think we ought to take some time to explore further their status, because there are very good arguments, I think, for why they fit the category in an oddball way that's a fairer way. So I'd like us to do that as well.
That's in your motion.
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
So I got a motion to amend, and you've added to my motion to amend.
correct.
Okay. So is there a second to my motion to amend as added by?
Second.
Okay. All right.
You're talking about some consideration for sculpture in the south.
Well, look into
In the
it.
future, look into it. Yeah. I was a little disappointed too. I have always enjoyed sculpture in the South, and I saw that they were given zero consideration. I didn't think that was fair.
Well, I talked with, Mr. Pratt about that, and it was a little bit misleading. I think Dr. Engelmann agree with me. It's not that they really, well, they turned them down, but it was just a lack of information that they had. Is what Mr. Pratt told me. And I don't think they really wanted to turn them down. It was kind of a lack of information that the committee had. And Dr. Engelmann was out of town. And so there was no questions asked, so the committee just turned them down. And so I think that if we could, like Terry said, look into it, we might be able to come up with a way to fund
I
that.
think we need to give them some consideration. They've been with us a long time, and I enjoy sculpture in the South. I think it's a good.
Well, we can, he just amended it, so we can look into it without going back to the committee, maybe.
Okay.
Okay, Bill, what we voting on? Your amendment first?
Mr. Mayor, if
My
I,
amendment basically to segregate out and vote on Flowertown players separately and to, in the future, consider sculpture in the South is what I understood.
Okay, so.
And that's what I seconded.
and I just have one more question. If we're going to approve this tonight, for the 308,000, and if we're going to reconsider sculpture in the South in the future, is there going to be any other money available to do that?
It's all based on what we could let during the year, previous year. That number, 308 will not change. It will change next year. And given some of our hospitality increases, I'm sure that will increase accordingly.
So if I'm understanding correctly, there's like a snapshot that we use, I guess it's the fiscal year. This is how much A tax was collected. And is that, that 308, is that the maximum amount that we can distribute to organizations this year?
I can't remember. I think that was, because we have,
Okay.
we have some we give to the tourism. or
Right,
Tourism percentage.
we got contracts.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I think that was the question. So if we do, if we're looking at funding, sculpture in the South, something, we either have to cut somewhere here or wait until next year. Okay.
Well, I'm in favor of that. I think we need to give them something. I think it's a good organization. I don't think this is written in stone. I think it's up to the council. So I think we need to try to be more egalitarian with people who take time to do some things that help the town of Somerville. They just can't kick them to the curb.
Is there a deadline on the distribution of this money?
Yes, there is. 'Cause I know Beth has to file a report, by October. This is kind of out of left field. I'm sorry, at least I didn't say this to you first, but you could consider, local accommodations, funds if you wanted to use that for that expenditure as well.
Oh, okay.
Can we look at a list of, Rhonda, can you get us a list of who they gave money to, and then we can just cut a little bit out of everybody's and then give it to, oh, that's it right here. If y'all want to do that now, let's do that another time. I mean, as long as they get it.
I mean, I guess that's one way to look at it, and I'm not as familiar with how we distribute and when we distribute the funds. I do believe that the organizations that have been approved are expecting or hoping, pleading, whatever the right term is, to get those funds as soon as possible. I guess in my mind, whatever amount that we may be looking at, I think there are other ways to look at how we may do something for South sculpture in the South this year while we work through what we're going to do in that next year.
Well, I mean, we can always send it back to the committee and have them, let them know how we feel about sculpture in the South and see if they can
Well, I'm like Terry, well, that does make good sense, but these people have already told they're gonna get this amount of money. But,
I think the cleaner route, excuse me, would be to go ahead and make the consideration from your State Accommodations Tax Advisory Committee as it's been presented to you. And I think if you all do want to reconsider a request from Sculpture in the South, that you all can take that up next month. And as Rhonda pointed out, we may have some funding available in accommodations tax fund balance that you all could use to consider that request.
Great. I think that's the way to proceed.
Fine with me. Yeah.
All right, Mr. Mayor, so there is a motion on the floor to, from what I understand.
Two
Uh,
amendments.
I think what we're trying.
The
to do
motion
here-
that I made was to approve this list as given
Mhm.
and to explore other funding sources, should we so choose to do so, to help Sculpture in the South in this year's budget, while we look forward to them being a part of this the next time around.
And Flower Time Players gets voted on separately.
I made a motion to amend and you still, I thought, Mr. Jenkins, I thought you were adding to my motion.
Correct. I was. To
Okay.
yours to drop out.
You're just recusing yourself from voting on something.
I think this is gonna be easier for me just to recuse myself from voting on all of it. I withdraw my amendment.
Yeah, me too. You too. Don't vote. Recuse yourself from voting. That's the easiest way to do it.
I won't be voting because I serve on the Flower Town Players Board. Knock yourselves out.
Okay, now, Mr. Mayor, there is a motion and a second to consider or to approve the Accommodations Tax Committee advisory recommendations as submitted.
In a second.
Yes.
Okay. All in favor of this signify by raising your right hand. Vote not.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Ayes carried.
It's not that way.
What else? Ollie?
Approval of intergovernmental agreement with Berkeley County for the Cedar Street project.
I'll make a motion to approve that.
Second.
Okay, motion made and second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by raising your right hand. Vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Ayes carried.
Approval of intergovernmental agreement with Dorchester County for the Cedar Street project.
Motion to approve this agreement.
Second.
Motion made and second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor signify by raising your right hand. Vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. The ayes carried. Okay, public comments on any topic.
I think we covered them all.
I've got one.
Oh, well, never mind.
Matthew Lightsey.
Oh, skateboard.
Council. Here again to ask the council to remove or amend few ordinances that are outdated and unreasonable. Section 28-4 of the city code states that it's unlawful to ride roller skates, skateboards, or inline skates on any public street or sidewalk. Within city limits, I assume that's not what it states, but I assume that's what it is. One thing that came to my attention actually after last session that I was here with when I spoke last was that I looked up section 28-45 primarily deals with motor vehicles, but it also states that it's unlawful to ride bicycles or scooters on public sidewalks. And that this in the chapter, the section 28-5 states that it is a misdemeanor for any violation of the chapter. So technically you could be in a misdemeanor and guilty of misdemeanor by riding your skateboard or a bike on the sidewalk. And with the council, I believe Touchberry, you mentioned wanting to increase pedestrian and bicycle connectivity. That would be a huge, huge wall in front of that endeavor. because this just makes it essentially illegal to bike on a sidewalk. And it could be in your neighborhood, it could be in downtown. I believe someone mentioned earlier, they used to ride to downtown on the bikes. Like you technically can't do that if you're on a sidewalk by the word of the law. And I would like to ask the council to consider amending or removing these ordinances. Well, particularly section 28-5, but also section 28-45 of the city code. That is all.
Thank you, Mr. Lights.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I'd make a motion, we go into executive session to discuss personnel, legal and contractual matters related to a personnel matter related to the Municipal Election Commission, personnel matter related to Fleet Maintenance Manager, personnel matter related to the Director of Community Development, personnel matter related to Finance Department, contractual matters related to potential purchase of real estate, and receive legal advice and discuss contractual matters related to memorandum of understanding with Dorchester County.
Second.
Okay, motion made and second. Any discussion? If not, all in favor, signify by raising your right hand. Vote aye.
Aye.
Opposed likewise. Ayes carried. Going into executive session.